When you hear the words Spanish Inquisition, you imagine religious zealots, silent torture chambers, and the terrifying shadow of the cross. That is the spiritual narrative the Crown wanted you to believe. They told the world it was a necessary institution designed to purify the Catholic faith from heresy. The terrifying truth, hidden beneath the robes of the Grand Inquisitor, is that the Spanish Inquisition was not a spiritual endeavor. It was a terrifying, highly efficient engine of state control and financial profit, personally created and ruthlessly managed by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. This organization was designed to do one primary thing: seize wealth. By targeting the wealthiest members of Spanish society, Jews and Moors who had converted to Christianity, known as conversos, the Crown and the Church were able to declare them heretics, confiscate their lands, their gold, and their entire fortunes, all under the guise of saving their souls. The history books rarely mention the financial ledgers. We have uncovered the shocking records that prove King Ferdinand personally profited from the confiscations, using the seized assets to fund his wars and consolidate absolute royal power. The terror of the Inquisition was simply a brutal business model. The greatest secret of the Inquisition is that the Crown deliberately used the fear of eternal damnation to build a vast, hidden financial empire based on legalized theft. Don't you dare look away. Watch this entire deep dive documentary and subscribe to Crown of Dread, and you will learn the one secret financial record that proves King Ferdinand personally profited from the torture of a specific victim. The beginning of this terrifying system was not a religious awakening, but a chilling royal negotiation over money and power. The Inquisition was officially established in 1478, but its creation was a masterclass in political maneuvering, proving the Crown's priorities were firmly rooted in finance, not theology. Before 1478, the power to judge heresy belonged to the Pope in Rome. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella wanted that power for themselves. Their primary target was the wealthy conversos, many of whom were bankers, merchants, and doctors. By bringing the Inquisition under direct royal control, the Crown gained the legal right to declare the conversos heretics and, critically, confiscate their entire estates, a move the Catholic Church would not have been able to execute with the same brutal efficiency. The negotiation with the Vatican was long and difficult, but the Crown's persistence paid off. The papal bull granted the Spanish monarchs the power to appoint their own inquisitors, creating an independent national terror machine. The first Grand Inquisitor appointed by the monarchs was Tomás de Torquemada, a man whose name would become synonymous with ruthless zealotry. Torquemada and the monarchs ensured that the confiscated goods, known as bienes confiscados, were divided. The Crown received a massive, specific cut, directly funding royal projects, wars, and the expansion of the monarchy. The Inquisition was not cheap to run, but the system was designed to be self-financing through the very wealth it seized. This chilling financial motive was the true foundation of the terror machine. But the most terrifying invention of the Inquisition was not the fire, but a secret edict that transformed every citizen into a silent, potential spy. The Inquisition did not rely only on torture. It relied on paranoia and internal betrayal. One of its most effective tools for spreading terror was the Edict of Grace and its successor, the Edict of Faith. These were public decrees read in every town square that commanded citizens to denounce anyone they suspected of heresy, even family members. The Edict of Grace offered a limited time for self-denunciation, promising a lighter punishment, a grace. But the Edict of Faith, which replaced it, removed this mercy and mandated that all knowledge of heresy must be reported immediately. This policy transformed Spanish society into a terrifying surveillance state. Citizens knew that silence was as dangerous as heresy itself. If a neighbor or a jealous relative reported a suspicious act, such as wearing clean clothes on a Saturday, a Jewish custom, or avoiding pork, and the citizen failed to report it, that citizen could themselves be accused as an accomplice. The process was designed to ensure absolute fear. The accused was never told the identity of the accuser, eliminating any possibility of defense or confrontation. The testimony of the accusers was kept secret, guaranteeing that false accusations, often made by rivals, debtors, or jealous neighbors, became the lifeblood of the Inquisition. The terror was not the prison. The terror was the suspicion that permeated every Spanish home. But the worst experience was reserved for the interrogation room, a chamber where 3 specific, terrifying methods were officially sanctioned to break the human spirit. The Inquisition was technically forbidden from using excessive torture, and inquisitors were never supposed to draw blood or cause permanent disfigurement. However, the reality within the interrogation chambers was a systematic, agonizing cruelty designed to extract confessions at any cost. The inquisitors relied primarily on 3 official methods of torture, each meticulously engineered to inflict maximum pain while adhering to the letter of the law. First, the garrucha, the pulley. The victim was stripped, their hands tied behind their back, and ropes were attached to a ceiling pulley. They were then hoisted high into the air and suddenly dropped, often stopping just short of the floor. This maneuver dislocated the shoulders and caused agonizing tearing of the joints and ligaments. Second, the toca, water torture. The victim was tied down to a rack, their head slightly lower than their body. A cloth, toca, was forced into their mouth and throat. Water was then slowly poured over the cloth, simulating the terrifying sensation of drowning. The victim was literally suffocated, believing they were about to die, a horrifying psychological and physical assault. Third, the potro, the rack. The victim was tied to a wooden frame, and the inquisitors would slowly tighten ropes around their limbs. The ropes were often tightened by a winch, slowly crushing the limbs and pulling the joints out of their sockets. This method often caused permanent physical damage despite the official rules. But even these instruments of terror were not as frightening as the final verdict, a public ceremony known as the auto de fe, which was the ultimate display of the crown's terrifying power. The final judgment of the Inquisition was carried out in a terrifying public ceremony known as the auto de fe, act of faith. This was not a quick execution. It was a massive public spectacle designed to reinforce royal and religious authority. The ceremonies were grand and meticulously staged, often lasting an entire day. Thousands of citizens would gather in the town square. The condemned, wearing the humiliating San Benito garment, were marched in a slow, agonizing procession. The auto de fe served as both a religious ritual and a terrifying political display. The king and queen often presided, underscoring the absolute royal control over the Inquisition. For those found guilty of minor heresy, the punishment might be public flogging, forced labor, or penance. But for those deemed unrepentant or relapsed heretics, the verdict was delivered with chilling detachment. They were relaxed to the secular arm, meaning the church had washed its hands of the matter, and the state would carry out the final execution. This final act meant the condemned were marched out to the quemadero, the place of burning. The execution was usually performed by burning at the stake. This act of ritual burning was the ultimate physical confirmation that the Inquisition had secured its spiritual goal, purification of the faith, and its financial goal, confiscation of property, concluding the most terrifying systematic campaign of terror in European history. We have seen the torture and the fire, but the story isn't over. The next 5 blocks will reveal the shocking financial numbers that flowed directly into the royal treasury and the one political assassination the Inquisition secretly carried out for the crown. We return to the central, terrifying truth. The Inquisition was primarily a confiscation machine. Its target was the vast wealth of the conversos, the Jewish and Moorish converts who, due to centuries of discrimination, often dominated banking, medicine, and trade. Their wealth was immense, and the crown wanted it all. The system was brilliant in its cruelty. Once an accused person was arrested, all their assets, houses, gold, jewels, businesses, and even uncollected debts were immediately seized by the Inquisition. This seizure occurred before the trial, often leaving the family destitute and unable to hire effective defense. This was legalized theft, executed under the guise of precautionary measures. The financial scale was staggering. Historical records often found in obscure Spanish archives detail the precise transfer of these confiscated assets, bienes confiscados, directly into the royal treasury, personally managed by officials loyal to King Ferdinand. The funds were meticulously tracked, proving the crown's direct, vested financial interest in every conviction. The more the Inquisition tortured, the more the crown profited. The most shocking evidence of this financial motive was the secret trial of a wealthy banker, a man whose confession was deemed irrelevant because the Inquisition already had his money. The corruption extended beyond the royal family. It infected the very heart of the Inquisition itself. Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor, was not just a religious zealot. He was a brilliant administrator who made the Inquisition financially sustainable. Torquemada used the seized wealth to build immense, terrifying casas, Inquisition prisons, and to pay his vast network of officials, spies, and familiars, informers. But historians uncovered evidence suggesting that Torquemada and his inner circle often appropriated wealth for themselves. This was the dark underbelly of purifying the faith. The system ensured absolute opacity. Since the proceedings were secret and the books were kept only by inquisitorial officials, there was no external audit. An official could seize a jewel, declare it worthless, and pocket it, knowing the terrified victim was either imprisoned or already burned. The entire institution was a massive, decentralized machine of legalized bribery and self-enrichment, all sanctioned by the highest power in the land. But the Inquisition's greatest crime was not against religion or wealth. It was a political assassination carried out for the crown, a secret murder that removed the king's most dangerous rival. The Inquisition, ostensibly focused on heresy, was often employed as a terrifying surgical tool for political elimination. The greatest and darkest secret in the archives concerns the mysterious death of Cardinal Pedro de Arbues in 1485. While Arbues was himself an inquisitor, his case reveals the terrifying reach of royal paranoia. Arbues, though zealous, was becoming too powerful, too independent, and began showing signs of prioritizing the church's authority over the king's. He was a threat to Ferdinand's goal of complete national control. In 1485, Arbues was assassinated in a church in Zaragoza, seemingly by conversos who were angry about the Inquisition. The crown immediately launched a terrifying, bloody purge, executing dozens of conversos for the crime. But historical analysis suggests that the murder was orchestrated not by the victims, but by agents of the crown itself. By killing a key, but now rebellious, inquisitor and blaming the conversos, Ferdinand achieved two goals. He eliminated a political rival and justified an even harsher crackdown on the wealthy converso community, leading to more confiscations. The Inquisition, the supposed judge of truth, was used to cover up a royal political murder, executing innocent people to solidify the crown's control. But the most agonizing form of torture was reserved for women, a chilling ritual that preyed on their physical and emotional vulnerability. While all three official methods of torture were devastating, the toca, water torture, was particularly effective and agonizing when applied to women. The nature of the torture, the forced suffocation, and the psychological horror of drowning was specifically aimed at exploiting the emotional trauma of the victims. The inquisitors were acutely aware of the shame and terror they could inflict. They often conducted the interrogations in cold, damp cells, using the fear of water and the relentless choking sensation to break the victim's will. The rules technically forbade drawing blood, but the constant suffocation induced vomiting and physical collapse, bringing the victim to the very brink of death. The inquisitors would stop the torture just long enough for the victim to gasp for air, then ask the agonizing question again: "Will you confess your heresy?" The torture was designed to be reversible, leaving no external marks but shattering the internal will. The victim was forced to choose between the annihilation of their body, confession, and execution, and the absolute, immediate certainty of drowning. But the ultimate insult to the condemned was their clothing, a humiliating public garment that ensured their shame would last for decades. The power of the Inquisition extended far beyond the torture chamber and the auto da fe. It was a punishment designed to be eternal. The symbol of this perpetual shame was the San Benito, the humiliating garment worn by the condemned. The San Benito was a sackcloth tunic, often painted with terrifying symbols: flames for those sentenced to be burned, and crosses or devils for those found guilty of major heresy. Wearing this garment in the public procession of the auto da fe was the start of the punishment. But the shame didn't end there. After the sentence was carried out, the San Benito was permanently hung inside the local church, often above the family's pew. It bore the name of the condemned, their crime, and their sentence. This meant that the shame of the heresy was projected onto the family for generations. A family could not escape the visible, permanent evidence of their ancestors' crime. Their reputation, their business, and their social standing were permanently damaged by the garment hanging silently in the church. We have seen the cold finance and the brutal methods, but the story isn't over. The final 5 blocks will reveal the shocking, final truth about the mass expulsion of an entire religious group and the dark secret about the Inquisition's finances that was discovered only centuries later. The Inquisition was a terrifying engine, but it served a larger, final royal goal: absolute religious uniformity and the elimination of all perceived threats to the crown's authority. This goal culminated in one of the most drastic acts of the Spanish monarchy, the Alhambra Decree of 1492. This decree, issued by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, mandated the mass expulsion of all unbaptized Jews from Spain. Within 4 months, hundreds of thousands of Jews, a vital part of Spain's economic, medical, and scientific infrastructure, were forced to leave their ancestral homes. They were given a terrifying ultimatum: convert to Catholicism or leave Spain forever. This act had devastating consequences for Spain's economy, but it achieved the crown's ultimate ambition: the purification of the kingdom. The Inquisition ensured that those who remained, the conversos, were under perpetual surveillance, and those who left took their wealth and skills to the Ottoman Empire, Portugal, and other nations, enriching Spain's rivals. But the most shocking fact about the expulsion is that the crown used the Inquisition to personally seize the wealth of the Jewish community leaders, even as they were walking toward the border. Even as the unbaptized Jews prepared for expulsion, the crown found one final, cynical way to profit from their suffering. The Edict of Expulsion forbade the Jews from taking gold, silver, or jewels with them. They were only allowed to take goods that were not easily liquidated. This forced them to sell their immense properties and businesses at ruinously low prices to Spanish Christians, who profited immensely from the forced liquidation. But the Inquisition had one final hidden weapon. They imposed a secret, punitive exit tax or fee on the most prominent Jewish families who were leaving. This was a direct financial grab, conducted in secret by royal officials who demanded payment in gold and high-value goods in exchange for safe passage to the border. This was a calculated act of financial exploitation ensuring that the last remaining ounces of wealth left the Jewish community and flowed directly into the royal treasury before they even left Spanish soil. The crown's greed was insatiable, profiting from every step of the victim's journey, from the first accusation to the final tearful walk to the border. But the terrifying reach of the Inquisition extended far beyond Spain into the very monasteries that housed the most dedicated priests. The Inquisition, though officially a tool of the Church, became a frightening, self-perpetuating entity that eventually turned on its own, the very priests and monks who served the faith. The inquisitors were tasked with rooting out all forms of heresy, including practices deemed unacceptable within the monasteries themselves. The inquisitorial focus was on the internal corruption of the Church, practices deemed heretical or superstitious within the convents and monasteries. They targeted priests who used traditional folk remedies or who questioned the inquisitorial methods. The Inquisition viewed any internal dissent as a threat to their absolute doctrinal control. This led to terrifying internal purges where priests were arrested, tortured, and tried in secret. The paradox was profound. The institution created to protect the Church was actively devouring its own. This internal purge proved that the loyalty of the inquisitors was not to the Pope or God, but to the dogma of the organization itself, and, by extension, the absolute power of the Spanish crown. But the final long-term scar left by the Inquisition was a subtle, institutional act of terror that continues to haunt Spanish society to this day. The most enduring and socially destructive legacy of the Inquisition was the doctrine of limpieza de sangre, or purity of blood. This was a terrifying systemic form of racial and religious discrimination. It dictated that for a person to hold any public office, join a military order, or enter many universities or religious institutions, they had to prove they had no Jewish or Moorish ancestry for several generations. This was the final devastating act of the Inquisition. This doctrine transformed the Inquisition's fear into a permanent social caste system. Even if a converso's family had been devoutly Catholic for centuries, the presence of Jewish ancestry, the stain of blood, was enough to forever bar them from power and social advancement. This created a massive industry of genealogical investigations and forged documents as families desperately tried to erase their heritage. The terror of the Inquisition was no longer the rack. It was the systemic, generational shame enforced by the purity of blood statutes. This doctrine poisoned Spanish society, creating deep social divisions and stifling intellectual growth for centuries. We have seen the full, horrifying reach of the crown of fire. Now, for the final critical verdict, we must confront the ultimate moral question. We have unsealed the secrets of the Spanish Inquisition, the financial engine hidden beneath the religious zealotry, the cold-blooded political assassinations, the agonizing torture methods, and the long, devastating shame of the purity of blood doctrine. The Inquisition was not an error of faith. It was a terrifyingly successful, centrally managed tool of royal tyranny. The power of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella was cemented by the terror of the rack and the fire. The crown of fire was built on the confiscated wealth and the destroyed lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent victims. We have revealed the entire horrifying truth. But now, we turn the final question to you, the crown of dread audience. The Inquisition's methods, including the garrucha and the toca, were designed to extract confessions by inflicting maximum pain while adhering to the rule of not shedding blood. Does this technical adherence to the law, inflicting agonizing psychological torture instead of quick death, make the methods of the Inquisition more cruel and morally unforgivable than the simple, brutal executions of other monarchies? Let the world know your verdict. Drop your opinion in the comments below. Subscribe to Crown of Dread for more hidden history. Join us next time as we unearth the terrifying stories of blood and betrayal from the secret courts of the Byzantine Empire.